So I'm going to talk a little bit more about IoT, specifically Azure IoT, Azure and IoT. I mean, obviously, the IoT revolution is something you're all well aware of. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I intend to try to use the next 25 minutes or so going a little bit more in depth on how what we showed worked and give you a little bit better idea about what Azure provides specifically with regard to managing IoT. Before we do that, though, there is a little bit I need to talk about here with regard to what we're seeing, because this is truly the next wave of computing. If you're not aware, and you probably all are, pretty much everything that we have, every device, every object has a computer in it now, from refrigerators to everything. So blenders, there's always a computer in everything now. And all of those devices are increasingly becoming connected to the internet for a variety of reasons. That connectivity leads to intense complexity for developers in terms of deriving understanding from the behavior of all these devices. This is very similar along the lines of these laws that we've talked about for a very long time around how complexity is increasing at an exponential rate across all these different measurement schemes. When people are thinking about IoT, obviously there's a lot of good ideas out there. This is a slide that builds out with some of these ideas around knowing about information about the devices that you're interested in. But it's not just about the devices. You know, controlling devices is important, but also understanding devices, being able to predict and derive intelligence from these devices. The device comes up, you've got data coming in from a device. Just to give you a little bit of a picture around how complicated this gets, you know, you have to secure those devices. One thing, a friend of mine has he put a lock on his house. He actually put an actual lock on his house, internet-connected lock, so that when he comes home it will automatically open. Think of the security implications. And that's just a lock on a house. What about you know, pacemakers today are connected in some cases. So think about the implications of that. There's the security becomes, we've entered a whole new realm of necessity of security around the device endpoints. Insights from that data. What can we derive? You know, this is a complex piece that often involves very complex machine learning operations. Multiples of devices out there, depending on what you're trying to track, what you're trying to understand. Data multiplies in a huge rate, and monitoring that in real time becomes even more complicated because you can't necessarily wait until that data reaches some sort of database. Looking for patterns and insights, like I said. So a lot of this is very repetitive, but you're beginning to get the point. Visualization, another intensely complicated process to try to derive some simple message out of a complex heap of data. So Azure has a lot of different aspects to it we've been focusing on in Azure to improve this situation. And one of the big things here, these are all different aspects of Azure that are very targeted at the IoT solution, but there's even more than this. Just to quickly recap here, the IoT Hub is a service in Azure that is sort of the beginning place when you're talking about devices. The devices out there connect to IoT Hub. IoT Hub exists as an ingestion point from information coming from those devices, but it also enables two-way interaction. You can actually send commands to specific devices. There's a security aspect to it where keys are exchanged in order to maintain secure connectivity, secure messages with the devices. You can monitor those devices, and then you can also manage those devices, which is incredibly important. You've got all these endpoints running some sort of software on them. That needs to be updated periodically. Very important to be able to do that. You're not going to necessarily want to walk around globally with an SD card to update all those devices. Stream Analytics is a solution that enables you to analyze data in motion. You don't have to wait till the data is in a database. You actually can analyze that data as it comes in and perform queries in order to derive some sort of meaning. This becomes critical when you have time-sensitive processes that you need to understand, time-sensitive information that you want to look at in real time or respond to in real time, like an assembly line that's about to stall or break down because of some sort of dysfunction in the equipment. Azure storage, obviously there's many different ways of storing data in Azure. There's many different ways of analyzing data in Azure. All of those offerings are applicable here because you're dealing with massive, massive amounts of data. App Service. Azure App Service is a mechanism for publishing application experiences in the form of websites or making application back-end aspects of mobile application experiences. Those web apps are really important when you think about like the IoT dashboard, for example. Anything you're hosting on the web becomes a part of that. Power BI for visualizing and analyzing that data. Logic apps are one way of performing actions in a triggered manner based on those data. But you don't need to use logic apps. You've got other offerings too. Now, this is a very ugly slide. But it begins to give you a little bit of a picture around the full extent of what we offer with Azure. I want to actually just break this down really quick for you and try to give you a little bit of a better picture around what we're talking about when we talk about, when we show these things. Because, let me just, let me do this here, because I actually think it's good to try to give you a picture. Azure has a lot of different services on them, and we often talk about it as a series of layers here, from infrastructure at the bottom to platform services in the middle, and then at the very top you have a number of software as a service offerings. Now, when we talk about software as a service offerings, let's just look here. You know, software as a service, there's sort of two axes that we care about. One axis is control, and one axis would be automation. Now, software as a service, you know, you go out there and you subscribe to acquire software as a service package like Exchange, for example. I want email from my company. I buy Exchange online, I subscribe, and everyone gets it. That's a cloud offering. I pay money and I don't do any, there may be some administration involved, obviously, but there's no software development involved. That's a full package solution that I get online. Those are the most automated, and you don't have very much control. You don't control, so SaaS would be over here on the scale. Now, at the other end of the scale, where you have the most control but no automation, would be VMs. Now, VMs are what we think of as infrastructure as a service. It's the way most people start moving things to the cloud. I have an offering in my data center. I'm tired of managing and owning machines or renting machines. I want to actually just move that to the cloud where I don't have to manage the server anymore, but I have to move that, I can move that VM and it operates and is accessible and it requires my attention in the same way that an actual physical machine does. If it has to be updated, if the operating systems has to be updated, I have to worry about that. I have to take care of that. And then in the middle, you have sort of these PaaS offerings. There's just quite a lot of different platform as a service offerings. These are things like Azure App Service or you know, anything that's providing me some level of programmatic functionality in the cloud that I can access without having to think about the underlying machine infrastructure. And this is where a lot of activity takes place in terms of leveraging the cloud. Now, when you think about where would you think, you know, the least amount of work, of management work, is in the SaaS offerings, and typically you think people would start over there in terms of using and leveraging the cloud, but that's not the case. Mostly what we see are people starting out with VMs because they just want to take what they have and throw it online, but they don't get any of the benefits of the cloud that way. So it's actually quite an interesting conundrum. How do you get people from one end to the other? And this is something that is kind of important to think about as we think about the situation with IoT, because, let's go back over here. If I can operate the switch box. Okay, and this map here sort of represents that complexity here, what the offerings are. So building an IoT solution with all these pieces, very tricky and complicated. That's why we focused this year on delivering the IoT suite, which provides some of these basic building blocks in a packaged way, a packaged solution that provides you the pieces you need in order to start up a solution of your own. The two that we've got in the initial offering are the remote monitoring and then the preventive maintenance solutions. I want to talk a little bit about how those take the pieces and put them together. The first piece of the puzzle, like I said, IoT Hub. This is where your devices connect. And then Stream Analytics, where you can actually perform this real-time analysis on the data coming in. And then you might move into different databases. We've got 2 different databases that are available here for different purposes, as well as Event Hub. Now, Event Hub is very similar to IoT Hub. It takes incoming data and then it can process that data and perform operations on that data. But it's not a two-way stop, so it doesn't work both ways. When data comes into Event Hub, with regard to this solution, it's used to trigger web jobs. And so in a remote monitoring situation, you may want to have behavior occur as a result of some rule being triggered. Logic apps are one of the things that you might trigger in this example. So that's precisely what's being shown here. You're going in and performing some sort of business process as a result of that trigger being fired. You'll also have some web applications in the mix here, like the dashboard, but you could also have custom web applications of your own as well. This is what you get for free, basically, by starting, by free, I mean, this is what is automatically a part of the solution that you get. You don't have to put it together. Now, other pieces of the puzzle, like Active Directory, are important when you think about needing to authenticate users. And then you also have the devices, which are, again, connected into the solution through IoT Hub. So these are the pieces of the puzzle. And I'm going to take this and show you how this maps into what we provide in IoT Suite. So as we come over here, again, this is the entry point into IoT Suite that I showed earlier, where you've got the actual starting place where you can create a solution or your existing solutions are shown. And what you get as a result of that is you get this is the standard web portal that you get. It has several different components to it. A dashboard here, which is showing a map location, alarm history, and again, this is pretty easily configurable in the solution to tailor to the type of monitoring you're performing and the types of actions that you want to take once those triggers are fired. By default here, we're seeing it's a sample device, but I can take this and point it at the sensor that's sitting right here on the internet, and you'll see this one will be reporting temperature and humidity. It's had some interesting spikes here in temperature, but for the most part, staying pretty stable. And some of the alarms here, these are alarms that didn't fire, but they're pinging at a particular interval that we've set. I can also take a look at the devices that are connected. This is a view on devices that have been established in the IoT Hub as part of the solution. And these are part of our sample, and then there's some sample devices as well. Rules are also enumerated out here. You can establish rules directly in the hub, as well as actions that become triggers of the solution. This IoT web application, the solution, is part of what you get as a result of starting an IoT Suite project, but it's also a full Visual Studio solution that you get, and this is all published on GitHub as open source, so you can actually go to GitHub, and if you're interested, you can actually go browse the source and leverage this for your own purposes as well. It's, again, part of our approach right now where we are very much focused on providing you a starting place from which to extend and build out your own solutions. A lot of documentation here and links to all the appropriate documentation, but all of this code is right here. And I can show you really quickly here. You've got the web project here, which is the actual dashboard. You've got a simulator web job, which is actually providing the sample devices that are in there. Then you have some event processor web job, which is the event hub that you're piping into, as well as a web job host, which is actually performing the task of monitoring the incoming traffic to see if an alarm has been fired or not. The other piece I wanted to show you here was Stream Analytics, because this is a very powerful piece. In order to do that, I have to come in here to the Azure portal. This is the native Azure portal that I talked about a little bit earlier with an enormous amount of options and tabs, and it can be quite overwhelming. And I wish we had that Azure bot right now that I could leverage just to immediately go somewhere. But this is the Stream Analytics job that's been set up for this project. You can see it has an input and an output. It can take multiple inputs. It can have multiple outputs. But in the middle, the important operative piece is the query. And what the query does is it enables you to actually leverage SQL, if you're familiar with SQL, to perform an operation on data in a pipe as though it were a database. So this is extremely powerful here. You can even do things like time slices. You can create a time window and do a group by, so you can create, you can monitor traffic in a time-based manner. All that we're doing here, though, is we're actually going in, and the key piece that we care about is the temperature rule, and we're creating a temperature rule output because we want to see if that sensor has detected a temperature below the level that we had set. That's the main thing that's happening in this Stream Analytics job. The hub, again, key piece of the puzzle, monitors the devices, handles the communication with the devices, two-way communications, and as well as multi-protocol, multi-platform SDKs available for it. We'll talk about that in a minute. We've announced right now some enhanced offerings with regard to device management. And this is, again, the point where you're managing the remote devices. Gateway SDK is another important piece, too. Lots of devices don't communicate over TCP/IP. And so it becomes increasingly critical that you're able to queue that traffic, handle that traffic, and then aggregate it in a way so that you can communicate it over the internet. Gateway SDK provides you that ability. The IoT starter kits are very interesting because they are kits that we have provided that you can get that have hardware as well as software. This is for the client side of the puzzle. And we've had new availability that we've released, announced recently, too. I don't want to talk about that. We actually have a very limited amount of time. I think I'm going to show you another demo because one thing that we haven't talked about here is direct control of the device. It's through IoT Hub. Once we've got a connection with IoT Hub and the device is connected with IoT Hub, we can actually write a very simple console application to control specific devices. Let me, I need to bring up the camera again. Because I want to show you on this Raspberry Pi here, connect to the right camera. And seem to have jostled the camera a bit here. Let me, apologies. So if we look at, hopefully I'm not going to, we've got this one Raspberry Pi here that has some LEDs on it, and this unfortunately is not an ideal way to do this, but let me show you the code and we'll come back and take a look here. This code, it's very simple to control a device in complex manners with very simple code here. It's just simply about creating some JSON that sends the correct information to the correct device. And so once we know and have an authenticated pathway to that device, we can just send these parameters and change LEDs, turn on the fan, turn off the fan. This type of control is very simple. So I just wanted to show very quickly here changing the LED red with this simple console application. Let's see if I can get this here. You'll see the, if I turn over to the camera, it happened, the color's not even showing on the camera, but trust me, it turned red. So very easy to manipulate and control these devices over IoT Hub through the internet. All right, device management is a critical piece of the puzzle. A lot of things were announced with regard to device management. If you are an IT manager who handles lots of devices, you are very interested in this, but many of the rest of us are not. Firmware updates is another example of something that's extremely complex and difficult, but we have a secure manner to handle that here. And the Gateway SDK we talked about before. Starter kits, this is actually very interesting here. Number of different pieces of hardware that we have available with operating systems and sample code for interacting with Azure IoT, Raspberry Pi, Intel Edison, and some of these other devices. And that's all available from azure.com/IoT starter kits. And availability. So we've announced new regions. My understanding is that in Canada, you don't have IoT Suite available in any of your data centers here, but that you do have access and the ability to leverage IoT Suite hosted in the United States. And I believe that that's about all that time I've got to talk about IoT today. But we are going to have Q&A immediately now, I believe. So that's my talk about IoT.